Who fetches more wood? Who moves the embers? That vigilant rhythm keeps the night alive. Historians still debate whether tending the fire was a shared responsibility, passed equally among family members, or a task assigned to a specific individual. The truth may vary by region, but the very debate points to how central fire was to survival on cold nights. Now imagine sounds: the hiss of snow falling into flames, the crackle of resin popping in the firewood, the soft rustle of someone rising at night to add more wood. You turn over beneath your robe, the scent of animal hides mingling with smoke, and the gentle murmur of a mother's lullaby hummed to soothe the child. The wilderness is silent outside your circle, but inside, the fire has a heartbeat. You reflect on how in modern life, you rely so much on matches or lighters. Here, fire comes from skills parks patiently struck from flint, embers carried in bark containers when moving camp, or effort made by patiently rotating a hand drill until smoke rises. This makes every flame precious. You do not waste it, you cherish it. When the cold waits at the edge of the light, sleep must never be careless. As you nestle by that fire and drift towards sleep, there is a moment when you realize how the mind acts. You no longer see the cold as an enemy but start to see it as part of a rhythm. The ache in your fingers, the steam of your breath, the glow of embers. These become the wilderness's lullaby. The fire does not completely banish the cold. It teaches you how to balance with it, how to coexist. Your eyelids droop, your body curls tighter under the hides, and the cracking continues. Tonight, in this fragile circle of warmth, mastered by countless generations, you are safe enough. Before you slip deeper into sleep, one last thought flashes. If you found yourself here, without the fire, without that knowledge, the night would swallow you whole. But the story is just beginning. Fire is only the first secret. The next secret is how layers of hides themselves can mimic the warmth of a modern sleeping bag. Even as flames dance before your eyes, you still feel the pull of curiosity. You awake in that dim glow. The fire still burns, but it is low, just smoldering. Embers whisper their orange secrets beneath the ash. The cold has crept back, brushing your cheek like an uninvited guest, and you instinctively reach for the second line of defense layering. Not the quilted jackets or high monostec fleece you know today, but the intricate arrangement of animal pelts. Each layer traps air, every fold preserves the faintest body heat you can produce. One mainstream historical fact is that indigenous peoples across North America used multi-layered, stacked hides, forming what we might call a prehistoric sleeping bag. The skins of deer, elk, moose, and caribou were softened until supple and then laid with each layer overlapping the seams of the next. This simple principle, staggering the gaps, meant no cutting wind could find entry. Imagine yourself crawling into that bundle, pulling one layer over your shoulders, tucking another under your knees, until you are enveloped in a cocoon of fur and leather. An interesting detail that might surprise you: these furs did not always smell fresh. Without the convenience of dry cleaners or laundry detergent, bedding retained an earthy, musky scent, part animal, part smoke, part human. But strangely, for those who lived with them daily, these smells were not unpleasant. Signified safety. To them, the musk of fur meant home, a warm haven, the promise of survival. You might wrinkle your nose, but in that frozen wilderness, you would quickly learn to associate those scents with comfort, not discomfort. As you pull the hides tighter around yourself, the texture impresses you. The outside is smooth leather, deflecting snowflakes that roll off like raindrops from waxed canvas. The fur against your skin is an irregular, coarse yet soft sensation. You can feel individual hairs, some rough, some fine, all insulating you from the outside air. When you move, you hear the faint rustle of fur against fur. It is a sound so ancient, it could be the lullaby of survival itself. You notice another point: air is the real secret. Not just the fur itself, but how it traps tiny pockets of air between layers. That trapped air becomes an invisible blanket, filled with your own body heat. The scientific principle is simple, yet every modern down jacket or thermal blanket uses the same one. What you spend hundreds of dollars on at an outdoor store is essentially the continuation of wisdom perfected by indigenous peoples millennia ago. Historians still puzzle over whether all tribes were equally skilled in processing their hides. Some evidence suggests Arctic groups developed more advanced tanning methods to remove grease and harden leather, while others may have relied on rougher methods, resulting in stiffer, heavier bedding. The debate continues because hides decay quickly upon excavation, leaving us only faint traces of stitching or hair. But even with limited evidence, the consensus remains layering was universal. Everyone understood that one skin was never enough when the outside world could kill you with its icy breath. Now imagine the nighttime routine. Before lying down, you would spread 1 or 2 hides on the frozen ground, insulating yourself from it. Then you would pull several hides over you, putting edges tightly on, weighing them down with stones or other hides so no sneaky draft could find its way in. If you shared bedding with family, you would carefully overlap each other just like the hides your sister's shoulder against yours, a child's back pressed to your stomach. Layers of fur and layers of bodies blurred together, building a fortress against the frost. You might be inclined to think these hides were crude, orangey diffinic, but there was an elegance to them. They were portable, rolled up, slung on a frame, carried to the next campsite. Theirs doubled as cloaks by day, bedding by night, and sometimes, strung together, even tents. Versatile, durable, and vital, they embodied the minimalist wisdom of people who could not afford to waste energy. The soundscape soothes you again, the faint creak of fur ending as you move, the gentle rustle as you turn over. Beneath you, the layered hides resist the cold bite of the ground, and above, the weight of more furs feels protective, almost womb-minus-like. You inhale, and last night's smoke smell still clings to the fur, adding another layer of scent to the warmth. You reflect on your own bedroom, with its neat sheets and blankets, and realize how far removed that world is. Yet strangely, as you lie here in this fur, you feel equally comfortable, perhaps even more so, because the contrast between the deadly cold outside and the fragile warmth inside makes every degree of heat feel like a miracle. Before falling asleep again, you smile at the thought that these hides, simple and smelling of earth, are what allowed countless generations to wake at dawn rather than as frozen statues. You understand that while fire was the visible heart of survival, fire is the silent shield, the life minus blanket upon which entire peoples relied through long, cold centuries. The embers are dimming, but you are wrapped, safe, sinking into dreams once more. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll learn how an entire buffalo robe was more than just bedding. It became a shared comforter, thick and warm enough to keep a whole family alive at once. The fire has now diminished to a whisper, just a soft red glow beneath a crust of ash, and you burrow deeper into the cocoon of furs. But then you notice something even more clever. These hides are not just thrown over you. They are layered deliberately, tucked, overlapped, forming a system older than any sleeping bag hanging on a local camping store shelf. A mainstream historical fact is that indigenous peoples perfected this method of multiple animal hides, often arranging them like roof shingles, with fur sides alternating hair against skin for warmth, leather facing out to shed weather. Archaeologists have particularly noted this layering effect among subarctic groups, where survival demanded not a single breeze could sneak through. In essence, you are lying inside a carefully designed insulation envelope. But here is a bit of trivia that might surprise you. Grease, something you'd normally wash out, was sometimes intentionally left in the hide. A slightly greasy skin is more water-minus resistant, better at shedding snow or freezing rain. Imagine lying there, wrapped in furs that smell faintly of grease, feel slippery to the touch, but prevent you from waking up with a frozen, damp layer clinging to you. To you, with your modern sensibilities, this might feel a bit dirty. To them, it was clever chemistry. Sensory details surround you. The rough stitching with sinew thread, lightly scratching your wrist. The faint snap of frozen fur in a stitch breaking when pressed. The warm buffer of trapped air, slowly making this cocoon feel less like a wrapping of dead animals and more like an extension of your own skin. Each hide breathes, swelling slightly with warmth, contracting with cold, pulsing together like a living thing guarding you. You try to turn over, curl onto a side, realizing how these layers hold together without modern fasteners. Weight does the work. Some families used stones to weigh down edges against gaps. Others tucked hides under themselves so frost couldn't crawl in from below. When a layer wore thin, another was added on top. A constant cycle of mending warmth against winter's inevitable assault. Historians still question whether layering was more standardized in nomadic versus settled cultures. Did a family in the woods always keep a spare just for sleeping? Written records are scattered, filtered through European observers who didn't always appreciate the nuances. But what is clear is that layering was not improvised. It was routine, ritual, knowledge passed from elder to child like a secret recipe, refined over time. Now, paint the scene not of a single sleeper, but of a family group. A mother makes sure her youngest is wrapped first, snugly sandwiched between two hides. Older siblings curl around this bundle, each pulling their share of fur over their shoulders. Parents lie on the outer edges, broader bodies shielding against the wind. The layers of hides over bodies mirror the layers of bodies on the ground. Each person becomes part of a larger living quilt. Sounds at night vary by your location. Near the edge, you might hear the wind groaning against a bark wall or hide tent. Deep sounds become muffled, just the steady breathing of those around you, an occasional cough, the rustle as someone adjusts their bedding. Above it all, the silence of the snow continues heavy, relentless, but held at bay by the overlapping hides, guarding you like armor. Reflect on your modern blankets. Thin, colorful, easy to wash. They carry no stories. Yet here, each hide is a history. That deer was taken by your uncle. That moose fell during a river chase. That elk provided not just warmth, but tools, meat, and sinew. You are literally covered in the memory of the hunt, swathed in the gifts of your people's relationship with the land. Each layer is not just physical insulation. It is cultural continuity pressed against your heartbeat. Perhaps there is even a touch of vanity. Some furs were decorated, smoked to a deep color, or fringe. You lie in survival gear, yes, but also in art. It wasn't just functional. It was personal, expressive, a reminder that humans can find beauty even while fighting the cold. As you close your eyes again, you realize the brilliance of it all. It is not fire or fur alone that works, but the combination fire generates heat, and the layered fur traps it, stretching each flickering flame into hours of rest. And so you sink into sleep, knowing that without these overlapping hides, you would wake stiffened blue. Instead, you will wake alive. When you wake, you will notice something new: the buffalo robes that once covered entire families. These massive shared blankets, the very essence of warmth spanning generations. You wake before dawn, the firelight just a faint flicker, the edges of the furs frosted. The air is sharp enough to make your nostrils ache. But then you notice the extraordinary thing covering your family nest of buffalo robes, thick and broad, covering not just one sleeper, but several. These are not just blankets, they are masterpieces of survival. A detail historians generally agree on: Plains tribes prized buffalo hides above almost all other resources. A single robe could easily exceed 6 feet in length, sometimes even longer when taken from a massive bull. Carefully tanned to softness, retaining its winter minus thick fur, these robes became the ultimate cold minus weather gear. Imagine yourself lying under one now. The furred ends as a mattress, the leather back enough to stop wind. It is not just a cover, it is an environment. But here is an interesting record: some buffalo robes were so heavy, rarely shifting under them required effort. Early European observers described the sensation as being pinned by the animal's weight itself. Yet that heaviness was a blessing. The pressure trapped heat, pressed bodies together, creating an unshakable sense of security. You might complain about the weight at first, but after a few minutes, that sheer density becomes comforting, as if the earth itself was wrapping you in a protective embrace. You can almost feel it. The robe drapes unevenly, heavier at the edges, the fur smelling faintly of smoke and musk. It is not delicate like a quilt. It is primal, full of texture. Running fingers through the pile, you can feel the clumps knighting your skin, coarser than wool, but infinitely warmer. Under its weight, your body stops shivering. 18th and 19th century accounts mention that buffalo robes were not only used as bedding but were items of immense trade value. One robe could fetch tools, horses, or food from neighboring tribes or incoming traders. So when you lie under one at night, you are wrapped not just in warmth but in wealth. Your family might have acquired it through a long hunt or by exchange with another group. Either way, it symbolized survival in more than one sense. Archaeologists still debate whether these robes were primarily personal items or designed for sharing. Some sources describe single sleepers clutching their own robe, while others depict families huddled under one massive cover. The evidence is patchy, and no single answer fits all contexts. Yet, as you lie here imagining the scene, the shared version feels most natural. After all, warmth in the wilderness is not a solo act. It is shared, passed around like the fire itself. There is also a ritual dimension you cannot ignore. Certain robes were decorated with painted scenes, hunts, visions, symbols of spiritual journeys. Imagine sleeping under a hide depicting your ancestors' stories. The images glow faintly in the firelight. The warmth is physical, yes, but the patterns remind you of who you are, where you belong, and what continues. Each night becomes both a practical act of survival and a quiet communion with tradition. Think of the daily routine of preparing this bedding. In the evening the robe might be carefully unrolled, shaken of clinging frost, and laid on the ground or over other hides. The family arranges itself beneath, adjusting positions so edges overlap, leaving no entry for cold air. In the morning, once the fire is rekindled, the robe would be rolled up again, tied to a trough always, and carried to the next camp. Its portability made nomadic life possible. Yes, it was heavy, but in a life of constant movement, even heavy things had to be mobile. You wonder about the sensory world beneath that robe. As bodies press together, heat slowly builds, and soon you hear the muffled breathing of those around you. The fur rustles slightly as someone shifts, and you smell the mix of charcoal smoke and animal scent. The outside world may howl with wind and snow, but in this shared buffalo cave, the storm feels distant. Silence, weight, and warmth. Here is a strange cultural footnote: buffalo robes sometimes doubled as temporary sleds. In an emergency, people could pile goods onto a robe, tie it into a bundle, and drag it across the snow. So, the same hide that kept you alive at night might, the next day, carry your tools, food, or even your children. Every part of it was used. There was no waste, nothing purely decorative. Yet, not every robe was the same. Some were meticulously tanned, softened with brain mixtures until supple and smooth, while others remained stiff, hard to fold, and less ideal for sleeping. Specialists in a tribe usually handled the tanning, passing the knowledge down like sacred law. The subtleties of these processes are still things scholars try to piece together. Was brain-tanning universal? Did every group use smoking? The answers vary by time and place, reminding you that even the seemingly simple buffalo robe was part of a complex web of knowledge. You turn over again, adjusting to the robe's enormity, realizing how it shaped social life. Imagine 5 or 6 people lying side by side, pressed together, not because they wanted to, but because the robe demanded it. Children between parents, siblings in a row, elders near the fire. Privacy vanished, replaced by shared survival. Every night became a reminder of interdependence. Alone, you would freeze. Together under the robe, you endured. There was even a psychological effect. The robe's weight anchored you, making rest deeper, more stable. It's what modern sleep researchers call pressure therapy. The same principle as a weighted blanket. You, centuries later, curl under a mass-produced weighted blanket for anxiety relief, while here, indigenous people had discovered the same calming effect with buffalo hide. The science of comfort was discovered long before anyone thought to name it. As you drift in this imagined slumber, you reflect on the cost of this warmth. A buffalo had to be hunted, skinned, processed. The entire community worked together to turn raw material into a life-saving robe. But with colonization and the mass slaughter of buffalo in the 19th century, these robes became scarcer, more precious, until an entire way of life unraveled. You can feel the fragility of the world you are in, how dependent it all was on those vast herds roaming the plains freely. Yet for now, you are safe, swaddled in fur thick as a mattress, heavy as stone, yet soft enough to breathe. Your body heat radiates through the layers, mingling with the warmth of companions, forming a tiny sun that burns through the endless winter night. In the fading haze before sleep, you know one more lesson awaits. Because sometimes survival means not resisting the snow, but embracing it, digging into the drift, carving out a shelter where the frost itself becomes protection. That will be your next discovery. The buffalo robe still covers you like a fortress. But when you wake, the fire is out, only a faint wisp of smoke drifts into the prim eines Donskan. The cold rushes back, sharper than a blade, and you realize for alone is not always enough. In the vast northern forests, or on the wind-scoured plains, Native Americans often did not turn their backs to the snow, they faced it directly. The snow itself became a shield. What we can be certain of is that digging into the snow was not an act of desperation. It was strategy. By hollowing out a space in a deep drift, or by piling snow into a mountain tunneling in, families could create a sort of natural snow cave. They're not always the domed shape you imagine from Arctic imagery. Snow's insulating properties surprise most people. While it feels cold on your bare skin, a compacted shelter can trap air, deaden wind, and raise the interior temperature significantly. Outside it might be -20 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside the snow cave, it might hover just around freezing. When survival is measured in degrees, that's a staggering improvement. Here is a lesser minus than twists. No shelters not only hold heat, they also muffle sound. Imagine lying in that hollow, walls thickened white. Suddenly, the howling wind becomes faint, distant, muffled, as if you have stepped into a padded room. Children sleep easier in that hushed quiet. Mothers rest without the constant creak of branches overhead. In a way, the snow transforms from enemy to lullaby. The experience is tactile too. You crawl in on your knees, the passage narrow, your palms pressing against the cool, hard snow shelled, your breath instantly frosting into crystals that shimmer faintly on the inner walls. A floor hastily laid with branches of firs feels softer than bare earth. The curved ceiling above you seems to glow slightly, catching ambient moonlight and turning it into an eerie blue haze. It feels spooky at first, but after a while, that glow feels reassuring. Archaeologists have found evidence that some tribes built such shelters regularly in emergencies, especially hunters caught far from camp. They dug the snow pit just large enough for a body, covered it with branches and hides, and survived what would have been a fatal night. Scholars still disagree on the frequency of whole families sleeping in these snow constructions versus only using them for temporary hunting expeditions. Written accounts by early explorers describe both, but the details blur between observation and assumption. Imagine the process of building one. First, find a snowdrift deep enough to excavate. Then dig an entrance tunnel that curves slightly upward to prevent wind from funneling straight in. Next, you smooth the inner walls to prevent drip-melt, because a single drop of water can turn comfort into misery. Finally, you layer branches or even a spare robe under you, insulating from the frozen ground. Once ready, you and your family crawl inside. Block the entrance with a snow slab or hide, and listen as silence replaces the blizzard. Something unexpected here: a smoke hole wasn't always dug. In the smallest shelters, a fire was impractical, so warmth came from body heat alone. Your own breath would frost the ceiling, creating spotting patterns by morning. Yet, in larger constructions, a small fire was possible, carefully managed so smoke escaped through a weak spot in the roof. The idea of fire in snow seems absurd until you realize how well ice can reflect heat without immediately melting. You turn over under your road, imagining the feel of sharing such a cave with a group, shoulder to shoulder, these cold bodies stacked like cordwood. You would hear muffled coughs, whispers, maybe the giggles of children who thought sleeping in the snow was fun. Outside a storm rages, but inside heat slowly accumulates, each exhalation adding to the invisible reservoir of warmth. Cultural meaning lingers too. Oral histories describe snow caves as symbols of adaptability, proof that even the harshest environment could become an ally. To sleep inside the very thing that threatens to kill you is a humbling reminder. You cannot conquer nature, but you can learn to live with it. The smell, oddly, would be faintly less smoke, more the scent of frost, but crisp mineral smell of frozen air. Your hair would collect condensation that freezes into icy strands. When you wake, the interior sparkles with countless points of light. For a moment, it feels like sleeping inside a star. There's also a quirky observation from early missionaries. Children sometimes treated snow caves as playhouses, crawling in and out of the tunnels during the day. What was a matter of life and death for adults could become an adventure for the young. Laughter echoed in those chambers, softening the memory of hardship. You marvel at the ingenuity. Today's survival manuals still teach similar methods: digging trenches, building snow caves, blocking entrances. All these techniques echo indigenous inventiveness. They remind you that sleeping bags and tents are not modern inventions, but refined versions of knowledge already tested by countless generations. And so, as you stretch out in your imagined snow cave, you realize how strange it all is. You are no longer shivering. Your body has adapted. The snow is doing its job. The storm overhead is just a distant muffled roar. You close your eyes, contemplating the paradox. The snow you once cursed for its deadly chill now protects you like a womb. As you drift off, a thought lingers. Of course, not every night was spent in snow. Sometimes, survival came from humbler materials: branches, bark, a lean minus to hastily built to block the wind. That will be your next lesson, when you return to the woods and watch a shelter rise from the simplest fragments nature offers. You crawl out of that snow cave, morning light slanting across the drift, your breath curling like smoke in the air. The world feels exposed again, and you sense the danger creeping back. You realize snow is not always reliable. Too shallow, too wet, or simply absent in some regions. In those moments, Native Americans relied on another ancient defense: the lean -2, built from brush, bark, and whatever the forest could provide. Without a doubt, bark shelters were among the most practical inventions in wooded regions. Strips of birch, elm, or spruce bark could be cut, peeled, and layered to form a wall that turned aside biting winds. The frame itself was simple poles lashed together into a triangular or half-moon dome shape, then covered with sheets of bark or piled brush. Within hours you could have a sturdy sleeping place that significantly cut the chill. The forest gave up its skin, and in return, it sheltered you. Here is a strange detail: once dried, bark edges often curled. Those awkward pieces were discarded but were carefully tucked into gaps, wedged and overlapped until the walls looked scaled. The result wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Airflow struggled to penetrate. From inside, the patchwork pattern cut the firelight in odd ways, flickering shadows that seemed almost alive. Imagine lying under such a wall, watching light and shadow dance on the ripples, feeling safer than just minutes before. You can hear it taking shape: the creak of poles forced into the ground, the snap of trimmed branches, the dry rustle of bark dragged over snow. Each sound was a promise: roof, walls, a respite from the cold. When the shelter finally stands, and use it within, the silence returns, and the effect is immediate. Wind hisses outside, but inside, it is muted, the air calm enough for a fire to burn without constant flickering. Archaeological finds show that in the woodlands of the Northeast, entire communities sometimes slept in bark longhouses large enough for dozens. Its smaller lean -TELS remained crucial for travelers, hunters, and temporary camps. Scholars still ponder whether these shelters were always considered temporary, or if, in certain seasons, they became semi-permanent homes. The debate continues because bark structures rarely survive, they rot quickly, leaving little evidence. Yet our records tell us they were central to the survival strategy, year after year. Now imagine that details of preparing a lean minester for sleep. First, thick evergreen boughs are spread on the floor. As you kneel to arrange them, their resinous, sharp, reassuring scent fills your nostrils. Then hides are laid on that green mattress, softening the prick of needles. The outside fire is drawn close enough for heat to seep into the lean minester's open front, while smoke rises and drifts away. You curl up inside with another sleeper, the bark wall at your back radiating the faint warmth it absorbed. An amusing memory persists from early observers. They often complained of fleas from bedding made of branches and bark. It turns out, occasional insects hitched a ride with the evergreen boughs, making for less minus than minus ideal nighttime companions. You imagine scratching irritably in the dark, but decide it's a small price for not freezer. A flea or two beats the sting of frostbite. The textures comfort you. The bark wall is rough under your palm, flaky in places, solid in others. When you move, the floor gives a soft crackle, releasing bursts of fresh evergreen scent. The structure overhead groans faintly under wind pressure, but it holds, resilient, bending rather than breaking. You close your eyes, soothed by a chorus of creaks and sighs. There was another layer of ritual. Some tribes saw the act of building even a temporary lean minester was more than necessity. Songs were sung during construction, chants to honor the trees that gave bark and branches. Sleeping inside became not just physical shelter but spiritual alignment, a reminder that you were in harmony with the woods. In these beliefs, the lean minester wasn't just wooden bark. It was kinship, part of the same living world you belonged to. Modern campers try to replicate this method, cutting branches, stacking bark, laying evergreen boughs. Survival manuals echo the instructions indigenous people knew by heart. Yet something is missing: the patience, the rhythm, the intimate knowledge of which bark peeled easiest, which branches bent without snapping, which evergreen needles smelled sweetest when warmed beneath you. That intimacy with the land made each lean minester more than a structure. It was outborn of necessity. The debate among historians touches another point. Did families always orient the open side toward the fire, or did they rotate based on wind direction? Some evidence suggests flexibility and intuitive understanding of microclimates, adjusting nightly. It wasn't a rigid formula but a constant negotiation with the weather. You'll sense that adaptability mattered more than the building. Knowing how to build was important, but knowing how to adjust was crucial. And so, you lie in your imagined lean -2, bark wall at your back, firelight flickering on your face. The night grows colder, yet inside, you feel protected, enveloped by the forest generosity. It is not luxurious. Fleas, smoke, cramped space remind you of that, but it is enough. Enough to carry you to morning. When light filters through the bark cracks, you wake to a world still frozen but survivable. As your eyes grow heavy, you can almost taste the resin in the air, the bitter tang of smoke lingering in your mouth. Outside, snow gives a soft crunch under someone's step, perhaps the watch returning with more wood. You drift between wakefulness and sleep, comforted by the thought that the forest built you its own blanket. Yule is lean -TOS weren't the only clever shelters. Another secret lay beneath your feet, dug deep into the earth itself, where warmth was trapped not by bark or snow, but by soil. You sense this will be the next step on your journey. You leave that bark lean -2, its resin scent still clinging to your skin, and step onto snow covered ground. You stomp your boots, hearing a hollow echo beneath the frozen soil, as suddenly you realize that sometimes warmth is not sought above ground. Instead, indigenous peoples dug down, creating subterranean pit houses where heat was preserved like hidden treasure. Archaeological evidence shows that in many regions, especially parts of the northwestern subarctic, families excavated semi-subterranean homes offering superb insulation. Imagine walking across a winter plain and seeing only a slight rise in the earth, a wisp of smoke from a chimney hole, maybe the top of a roof covered in sob. Yet below, a room extended, lined with poles, mats, and furs. The earth itself became a wall, stable and sleepers from wind and frost. A detail that might surprise you. Even temporary hunting shelters sometimes borrowed this idea. A pit just 2 or 3 feet deep that alter how heat circulated. By going down, curling into the belly of the earth, you escaped the worst temperature swings at the surface. Modern campers talk about cold air sinking into depressions. But for indigenous peoples, the pit worked differently. When properly insulated with branches, bark, or furs, the ground enveloped you in pockets of still air, preserving every degree of heat your body generated. The process of building one was both labor and ritual. First, scraped open with bone or antler tools, the frozen soil reluctantly cracked. Then the hollow was lined with woven mats of reeds or spruce branches that released a piney scent. On this foundation, hides were laid, turning dirt into a bed. Then poles formed a roof that slanted like ribs, covered with brush, sod, or more hides, leaving a small opening for air and smoke. Prowling in, you'd feel as if you'd entered the chest cavity of some great creature sheltered, enclosed, breathing with you. Researchers still debate whether these underground shelters were primarily winter villages or seasonal retreats. Some evidence suggests your miners round use in certain areas, entire communities living below ground. Other records describe them more as temporary winter refuges, abandoned in summer for lighter, portable dwellings. The truth was likely a blend of shape minus, shifting to climate, resources, and tradition. Now imagine yourself settled in such an earthen room. The floor beneath you, though hard, emits a dull stability, neither icy nor searing. Above, smoke drifts lazily toward the vent. The walls absorb its smell until even the dirt smells of wood smoke. Around you, shadows flicker on packed earth, giving the impression the earth itself is alive. You lie back, enveloped, feeling a more constant warmth than any lean minister could provide. An interesting aspect from oral records: children's sometimes made marks or pressed patterns into the walls with their fingers, turning ordinary dirt into art. You can imagine small hands dragging through clay, leaving smudges that glowed like cave paintings in the firelight. Amidst the struggle, play persisted, leaving the mark of humanity in the mud. The acoustics inside such a pit were unique. Outside, the wind might howl, trees creak, wolves cry. Inside, the room softened every sound. Conversations became murmurs. Lullabies lingered in the corners after the voice stopped. To sleep here meant not falling into silence, but drifting into a gently resonating world, like a drum holding the last note. You can't help but think of modern basements, storm shelters, even military bunkers. The logic is the same: earth insulates. Yet in this indigenous context, it wasn't about concrete or steel but trust in soil and stone. People saw the land not just as a food provider but as house, womb, partner in survival. There are rich sensory memories to recall here, to the smell of damp earth mingled with wood smoke, the taste of ash in your mouth as the fire smoldered, the rough feel of packed ground under your fingertips. Sleeping in such a place was not luxurious. It was dusty, smoky, heavy, but it was safe. Every exhalation seemed to belong to the shelter itself. Every breath bounced back, making you warmer. Some accounts mention chambers large enough for dozens, a village hidden under the frost. Imagine walking down a tunnel, ducking under beams, into a communal room with multiple fire pits glowing, families curled on mats around the edges, the ceiling low, the walls thick, the heat collective. You would see children sprawled asleep, elders whispering in dreams, hunters turning restlessly before dawn. That subterranean rhythm stitched the community together more tightly than any above-minus ground home ever could. There's a practical footnote: to these rooms were not without problems. Ventilation was tricky. Without proper airflow, smoke built up, stinging eyes and lungs. Families had to balance heat and breathe at tiblet, constantly adjusting vents. Some days you might wake coughing, eyes watering, but still grateful to be alive. Survival was rarely perfect. It was always a negotiation. Still, compared to the cutting cold outside, The pit house was heaven. And as you curl under hides in your imagined room, you feel the weight of soil overhead, the steady pulse of a nearby fire, the collective breath of sleepers around you. The world above might be chaos, storm, ice, predators, but below there is peace. The earth swallowed you, hid you, kept you alive. As drowsiness comes, you realize this ingenuity didn't end with pit houses. Another trick awaited in the wilderness. One so simple it felt almost magical: fire minus heated stones, tucked into bedding, glowing long after the flames died down. That will be your next discovery. A secret that carried warmth into the night. The earth pit fades behind you, its smoky scent faintly clinging to your clothes, and you find yourself under open sky again. The campfire is dead to cold grey ash. You shiver, realizing tonight you have no roaring blaze, no robe large enough to cover your whole body, no pit house to retreat into. But then you notice something simple: nearby stones, still radiating warmth, carefully gathered by someone who knew this trick before you. Archaeological evidence shows that across North America, indigenous groups frequently used heated stones as nighttime warmers. The method was elegant and direct. Stones were placed in the fire in the evening, absorbing heat, then wrapped in hide bark or woven mats and carried into the bedding. Tucked at your feet, against your belly, even under layers of fur, these stones emitted steady warmth for hours. In essence, they were prehistoric hot water bottles, ancestors of every heating pad you've ever used. An interesting observation preserved in oral history is that some tribes were picky about which stones to use. Not every stone could withstand fire. River stones, for example, sometimes cracked or even exploded from internal moisture. So people learned to select dense, dry stones from specific places, remembering which outcrops yielded the safest material. Fire was not accidental. It was inherited, practiced, whispered from elder to youth, like a secret recipe. You crouch now in the dark, imagining lifting such a stone. Its surface feels rough, edges irregular, but heat seeps into your hands like embers held in solid form. You quickly wrap it in a strip of hide to avoid burns, tuck it under your robe, and suddenly the cold retreats from your core. The feeling is immediate, visceral, like carrying a private sun under your blanket. Researchers still debate whether heated stones were primarily used by hunters sleeping away from camp, or became common in larger village settings too. Evidence is hard to trace, as stones leave only scorch marks. Yet early explorers' accounts often described them, suggesting the practice was widespread, especially in cold climates where fuel was scarce. Why burn wood all night when you could store its heat in stone and bring it to bed? Think of the sensory details: the smell of hide singed where the stone pressed along, the faint crackle of bark drying around it, the gentle hiss as frost on its surface instantly vaporizes against your skin. The heat is uneven, intense at first, then gradually softening into a gentle radiation. You move it from place to place, chasing its fading warmth as the night deepens. Here is a small quirk that might make you smile. Sometimes people gave names to their favorite stones. A well-shaped, reliable heat-retaining stone became a companion, carried from camp to camp. You can imagine a grandmother scolding a child playfully for losing her stone, treating it not just as an object but as a trusted ally in the nightly battle against frost. Now imagine sharing these heated stones with several sleepers. Parents place one at a child's feet, another between two bodies, a third under the layered hides covering everyone. Warmth diffuses unevenly, blooming here and there, but together they make the night tolerable. The rhythm of survival shifts. You no longer fear the fire going out, because its energy lingers in these silent, nestled companions. Of course, there were dangers. Some hot could scorch hide or skin. Some cracked violently, sending sparks flying in the dark. To prevent this, families developed careful rituals: testing stones before wrapping, cooling them briefly in air, or layering extra cloth around them. It was a balance, demanding attention even in exhaustion. Survival never gave gifts freely. It always demanded vigilance. The psychological comfort was nearly as important as the physical warmth. Imagine a child clutching a warm stone in the dark, feeling less alone because of its steady presence. Even adults might sleep more soundly, fantasizing they held the fire itself in their arms. That comfort is timeless. Today, when you crawl under a weighted heating blanket and let your body finally relax, you are feeling its echo. There is a spiritual consideration here too in many indigenous traditions. Stones were not inanimate objects but ancient beings, keepers of memory and power. To heat a stone and sleep with it was, in a sense, to embrace something sacred. The warmth was not merely thermal. It was the land lending you a piece of its energy, reminding you that you belonged to it, not apart from it. And as you curl around your own heated stone in the imagined wilderness, the night seems less hostile. Your toes no longer ache with frostbite. With cold, you breathe deeper, hearing the low sighs of others doing the same around you. A chorus of sleepers, each with their secret ember, each wrapped in warmth borrowed from fire and stone. It makes you reflect on modern camping gadgets, chemical heat packs, rechargeable hand warmers, thermos bottles filled with boiling water, all of them echoes of this simple, timeless trick. Technology changed, but the principle was the same: store heat, release slowly, endure the night, and perhaps more importantly, rest deeply enough to dream. Dreams method. Oral accounts tell of visions seen while sleeping near a warm stone, messages delivered in the liminal space between wakefulness and cold. Some families believe that in those moments, the stone had a voice, whispering guidance, shaping dreams. You can almost hear it now, a low hum in your ears as sleep pulls you deeper, the warmth pulsing like a heartbeat, the stone becoming more than mineral, a companion. As your eyes close, you realize warmth isn't really personal. There always had to be someone keeping the central fire alive, tending it while others slept, ensuring more stones could be heated if the night dragged on. That vigilant rhythm carried the whole camp through winter. That will be your next glimpse: the rotation of family and God. The endless watchfulness that ensured fire breathed even after stars paled. The stone beside you cools slowly, its warmth fading like the last note of a lullaby. You turn over, pulling furs tighter, and notice the glow of another fire in the distance. This is not random, this constant flame. It is guarded, nurtured, never fully left to die. The people around you knew that letting the fire go out meant starting from scratch, an nearly impossible task on a frozen night. So they created systems, rotations, a rhythm of vigilance that kept the fire alive until dawn. One account from early explorers makes it clear that in many camps, families assigned fire keepers by the hour. Each adult took a turn, rising from sleep to stare embers at a log or move stones closer. In larger camps, elders often sat by the hearth all night, partly because they slept lightly, partly because their steady presence soothed the young. The fire was more than flame, it was continuity. The night would consume you. Here is a curious glimpse that sometimes appears in records: children were occasionally given the honor of tending the smallest hearths. Under a parent's watchful eye, a child might learn to gauge with thickness, to bank embers under ash, to extend them low, to blow with just enough breath to coax a spark. Imagine as even -year old entrusted with the heartbeat of the entire camp. You might feel pride or fear, or both, but you would quickly learn that survival rested on your careful hands. You can almost hear the sounds. The rustle of someone reluctantly rising from bedding, the quiet shuffle of feet on ground or snow, the scrape of a stick rearranging embers, the fire answering with a crackle, the hiss of new wood catching, the glow spreading over half-masked faces, casting flickering shadows on bark walls or hide ceilings. That faint light was a comfort to sleep, was not fully awake, but just aware enough to know the fire still lived. Researchers still debate whether fire standing rotations were strictly scheduled or more flexible, based on who naturally woke in the night. Some anthropologists cite oral traditions describing duty cycles, arguing for formal structure. Others suggest it was more instinctive: if you woke, you tended. The truth likely varied by region, but the essential point was certain: fire was everyone's responsibility. As unthinkable, the practice had a ritual side too. In some groups, prayers accompanied the stirring of the fire, whispered words reminding the fire of its role as a living ally. Feeding the hearth wasn't just a chore. It was a conversation, a bond renewed with every offering of wood. You feel the intimacy of the act, the relationship not with a thing, but with a being that gave light, warmth, and protection. Never disappeared. Fire meant defense. Predators hesitated to approach its glow. So keeping it alive also kept wolves at bay. Fire meant cooking. Bits of meat simmered in the embers ready for those who rose early. It meant light for tending wounds, warmth for thawing tools, smoke for curing hides. Fire was the axis of the night. Everything crumbled. Imagine the communal circle, a dozen sleepers ring the hearth, bodies angled toward warmth, heads turned to the glow. Every hour someone rose by necessity, not choice. And though you might imagine this constant vigilance as a burden, it also brought comfort. Sleepers could drift deeper, knowing someone else would wake, someone else would feed the flame. That shared responsibility bound people together. You weren't alone against the cold. Then there is the quirky detail. Sometimes the keeper would tell stories softly to the fire itself. Early missionaries recorded such moments, elders sitting alone at night, murmuring to the flames, speaking of hunts, losses, or dreams. The fire became confidant and protector. Imagine that scene, you wrapped in hides, half-minus dreaming as you hear a low murmur from across the campfire, an elder telling secrets to the flame, not to a person. It was strangely comforting. The sensory experience lingers, the smell of half-minus burnt wood, sharp and piney. The sudden flare of sparks as damp wood met flame. The uneven radiance of warmth. Her face burned if you got too close, your back froze if you turned away. The shifting glow traced fur and skin, painting the night in golden shadow. Even the rhythm of the smoke, sometimes choking, became part of the survival lullaby. Modern campers still understand pieces of this. Sit by a fire long enough and you'll instinctively tend it. Poke with a stick, shift wood, blow on embers. That impulse, passed down generations, connects you to those who did it not for leisure but for life. You are performing the same rituals, though for you the stakes are comfort, not survival. The deeper truth is this: the rotation of fire wasn't just about flame. It was about trust. To give someone the responsibility of keeping the camp alive was to say, I trust you to protect us. In a world where betrayal meant death, that trust was a bond stronger than stone. You curl tighter now under your rug, warned by the thought that even as you drift, someone else keeps watch. The fire hums softly, its light a heartbeat in the dark. You close your eyes, certain that when you wake, warmth will still be there. As you drift asleep, you feel the next lesson waiting, because sometimes fire wasn't enough, and bodies themselves became blankets, pressed together forming a network of shared heat. That story belongs to the next night, when survival came not from flame, but from human closeness. The fire flickers low, the glow's eddy but faint, and you turn over under your furs. The warmth is there, but thin, and you realize the elders always knew fire couldn't do everything alone. Heat would slip into the night no matter how carefully you fed the flame. That's when people relied on something more reliable: each other. Accounts by early observers emphasize that many indigenous communities practiced communal sleeping, not just for comfort but for survival. The heat generated by bodies pressed together was warmth no flame could match. Because your skin didn't just stay warm, it radiated warmth. Imagine snuggling next to family, shoulders overlapping, limbs entwined, each heartbeat adding another pulse of heat to the shared cocoon. An interesting note but surfaces from oral tradition: the placement of sleepers mattered. Children were sandwiched between adults, sometimes 2 or 3 layers deep, so their smaller bodies stayed insulated at the center. Elders usually lay on the periphery, using their bodies to shield the young from cold air seeping through gaps in hide coverings. It was both practical and symbolic, the old generation protecting the new, encircling like tree rings. The sensation is vivid. You roll toward another body, their skin warmed from the fire, their robe overlapping yours. The weight of someone's arm rests across you, heavy but reassuring. You hear the rhythm of their breathing, the occasional shift or murmur in a dream. At first, this intimacy might feel awkward, especially to modern sensibilities that crave privacy. But here, privacy melted into survival. Alone, You would freeze. Together, you endured. Researchers still debate how formalized these sleeping arrangements were. Some argue families followed strict patterns, elders on the outside, mother with infant in the middle, older children grouped by age. Others believe it was more flexible, shaped by the night's needs. The coldest person got the warmest spot. Whatever the truth, the practice ensured the camp woke alive even in the cruelest months. A quirky glimpse from early traders, they sometimes described feeling smothered when invited to share a sleeping space with indigenous hosts. Accustomed to individual beds, they found the press of bodies overwhelming. Yet by morning, many admitted they'd never been warmer in winter. You can almost picture one of them grumbling at night, later confessing with embarrassed gratitude that it was the best rest they'd had in weeks. The soundscape is intimate. Not just the crackle of fire, but the chorus of human noises, snoring that rises and falls like waves, sighs that slip out in half-minded sleep, soft, mumbled words from dreams. The air grows humid from breath, forming mist that clings to furs and walls, sometimes frosting when the temperature dropped to low. It wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. Each exhalation fortified the shelter, turning cold into something bearable. Think of how modern science describes this thermogramation through shared body heat. Infants especially regulate their temperature better when held close, the breathing assisting with the caregivers. Indigenous peoples didn't need thermometers to understand this. They felt it, knew it, lived it. Babies survived because mothers never let them sleep alone in the cold. Because they pressed back minus to minus back under hides after a long day. It was instinct honed into tradition. The emotional comfort mattered too. Falling asleep surrounded by loved ones, you felt safe in more than one sense. Predators might lurk outside, storms might howl, but in this warm circle, you were part of something unbreakable. The cold pressed from all sides, but togetherness pushed back harder. In some tribes, there was also deeper cultural resonance, the idea of sharing warmth aligned with spiritual teachings, warmth as a gift. Never hoarded, always passed on. The fire gave to you, you gave to others. The cycle continued. Hoarding warmth for oneself was seen as selfish, even dangerous. The community survived because everyone understood survival was collective. Now imagine the tactile world of such a night. You turn, feeling fur of fur, hair brush your cheek. A cousin's twitching foot pulse a light kick against yours. But child rolls over, gives a soft kick. The group adjusts with a murmur of complaint, then slips back to sleep. In the dim firelight, the scene is messy, crowded, imperfect, but it is also profoundly human. Of course, issues arose. Space was limited. Arguments flared over who got the warmest spot. Restless sleeper could disturb the whole group, but even these discomforts reinforced the reality survival meant compromise. You endured the irritations because the alternative was frostbite, or worse. In winter's cold calculus, annoyance was a small price. Modern examples are not hard to find. Hikers lost in blizzards sometimes huddle in a single sleeping bag to avoid hypothermia. Soldiers in frozen trenches survive by clustering together. Even today's pet owners know instinctively that a dog curled beside you on a cold night means safety. These moments echo the lesson indigenous peoples lived by: heat is communal. As you drift in this imagined slumber, you notice the psychological calm it brings. Feeling another's warmth is to feel their presence, to know you are not abandoned in the vast cold. It softens fear, quiets racing thoughts, makes dreams gentler. Some oral stories describe winter nights full of shared dreams, visions passing from one sleeper to another, as if physical closeness lets souls travel more freely. You might not believe that, but lying here pressed against others, you can almost imagine it. When dawn finally breaks, the group wakes slowly, and as hides are thrown back and people separate, the cold rushes in. You feel a pang at the sudden loss of warmth, the loneliness of standing in the open again. It reminds you that survival in this world was never solitary. It was always collective, always layered: fire, fur, body, spirit. But only together could they endure the night. As you inhale the icy morning air, you realize another layer of survival extended beyond bodies and hides. Movement itself was strategy: migration, shifting camp, chasing seasonal warmth. This story will take you farther, teaching you that even the act of walking could be a defense against freezing to death. Morning light glitters on snow, a pale wash that seems colder than warmth. You rise from the circle of shared steeples, shaking stiffness from your limbs, and realize something profound. No matter how well you tended fire, layered hides, or huddled together, there was a deeper truth. Sometimes the best way to get through winter was not to endure it in one place. It was to move. A detail preserved in tribal memory is that many indigenous peoples lived by the rhythm of seasonal migration. Entire communities shifted camp according to weather, following game herds, fish runs, or simply seeking milder conditions. On the Great Plains, for example, tribes might move south as temperatures dropped, avoiding the fiercest blizzards. In the northwest, families descended from higher elevations to valleys where snow lay thinner. Mobility itself became insulation. Why fight winter at its worst when you could outrun it? You might find it interesting that migration wasn't random at all. Trails carved by centuries of repetition were as familiar to these groups as city streets are to you today. Families remember the exact sequence of valleys, rivers, and sheltered hills, passing that knowledge down like a map etched in memory, even without compass or GPS. They navigated by stars, river bends, the mountain slopes with ease. To them, migration wasn't aimless wandering. It was a precise science of survival, tested generation after generation. The sensory world of such travel is rich. Imagine the squeak minus crunch of snow underfoot, a sound that only comes when temperatures are far below freezing. Horses puffing clouds of steam. Dogs barking as they pull travois laden with hides. Children laughing or complaining as they are tightly bundled onto sleds. Overhead, crows coo in the brittle air, their wings flashing black against the winter sky. The smell of smoked rails behind, because campfires are doused, leaving only faint wisps rising from rings of blackened snow. Scholars still puzzle over how far these seasonal migrations range. Some think tribes moved only short distances, staying within defined territories. Others insist groups of the Comanche or Yucatan migrated widely, adjusting routes yearly based on weather and food. Archaeological traces, teepee rings, charred fire pits, till fragments hint at both possibilities. The debate itself underscores the sophistication of these migrations, far from the stereotype of people wandering aimlessly. And migration wasn't just about escaping cold. It was about resource balance. Staying too long in one spot depleted firewood, scared away game, exhausted fishing grounds. By moving, families let the land recover, ensuring its bounty returned the next season. In this sense, survival wasn't just about staying warm tonight. It was about planning for winter a decade hence. You feel it in your body, the ache in your legs from trudging miles through snow, the sting of wind minus scoured cheeks, the steady burn in your lungs as you climb a ridge. Yet the motion itself warms you. Blood humps faster. Muscles generate heat. Sweat dampens your clothes despite the icy air. You realize walking is itself a heating system. Rest too long, and you risk stiffening. Move, and your own body becomes a furnace. A strange detail from oral stories: some children treated migration as adventure, racing along familiar trails, sliding down snow slopes, or pretending the travois was a rideable sled. What was hardship to adults sometimes became play for the young. You can almost hear their laughter echoing in frozen valleys, a counterpoint to the grunts of oxen or horses hauling heavy loads. At night, when camp was rebuilt, migratory knowledge also guided shelter placement. People remembered which groves blocked north winds, which slopes got morning sun, which rivers offered both water and a frozen highway. This wasn't luck. It was deep connection to the land, knowledge of its changes across decades, even lifetimes. Sleeping in the right spot could mean the difference between a comfortable night and frostbitten fingers. Here was another fascinating layer: migration strengthened community ties. Moving together required cooperation. One family couldn't decide to lag without disrupting the group. Elders set the pace. Hunters scouted ahead. Women packed food and tools. Children learned responsibility by carrying small bundles. It was a choreography of survival, the dance across seasons. You feel his rhythm in your own imagined body step after step, breath after breath, the constant crunch of moccasins or boots underfoot. The repetition becomes hypnotic, almost meditative, as if the act of walking was itself a lullaby against the cold. When camp is finally pitched again, the relief is palpable. Fire is rekindled, furs unrolled, food shared, warmth restored. You fall asleep knowing the journey will continue tomorrow. But tonight, you have outrun winter's sharpest claws. The modern echo of this survival strategy still exists. People still migrate for comfort. Some go south in winter, chasing warmth. Others simply shift routines, tossing summer cabins, moving into city apartments, booking flights to sunnier coasts. The principle is the same. If you can move, why freeze? The only difference is plains replace moccasins, highways replace forest trails. The psychological comfort of migration can't be underestimated either. Imagine you lie in a freshly made camp, knowing you've chosen the spot best suited for survival. Wind shakes branches overhead, but you're lean minus to faces south, sheltered by a hill. The fire burns steadily because wood here is plentiful. The robe feels heavier because you know food is near, water is close, safety is restored. Sleep comes easier when movement has already delivered you from danger. Yet you wonder, how did they know when to move, when to stay? The answer usually came from the natural world: animal migrations, early frosts, the position of stars, even subtle shifts in bird song. The land itself signaled it was time to leave. To ignore those signals was to invite frost, hunger, or worse. And so as you curl under hides tonight, the echo of footsteps still in your ears, you understand another layer of indigenous wisdom. Warmth wasn't always found by staying still. Sometimes warmth was a horizon, but destination, reached by moving faithfully with the seasons. Tomorrow you will discover that even plants, grasses, reeds, cattle could be transformed into insulation as astonishing as any animal fur. Nature provided everywhere, not just in herds of forests, but in the overlooked softness of fibers and fluff. You wake to the creak of frost-cracked branches and the distant cry of a crow, the world still wrapped in its endless white. The camp has stayed a few days. Migration paused for rest, for people and animals both. And you notice something new in the shelter layers woven and stuffed with plant fibers, soft as clouds, in stark contrast to the harshness outside. It's a reminder survival wasn't just about furs and fire. It was also about using nature's humblest gifts. There's archaeological traces and oral traditions indicate that plant materials, grasses, cattle fluff, rushes, even shredded bark were common winter companions. Imagine a mat woven of dried reeds, thick as a carpet, laid under hides to insulate from icy ground, or a pillow minus like bundle stuffed with cattle fluff, making you almost forget you're lying on frozen earth. These fibers were from more than filler, they became insulation equal to animal hides, and in some cases lighter, easier to carry. You might find it interesting that cattle fluff was sometimes stuffed into clothing, much like modern down. Children especially benefited from these makeshift linings, toddling through snow bundled so heavily with plant fibers they looked round, giggling as they stumbled, their breath puffing white in the air. To you, this might seem like a clever DIY hack, but to them it was standard winter practice. The texture is unique. Pressing your hand into a cattle pad, you feel the springiness of stems, the faint rustle of dry fibers shifting under pressure. Resting your head on a fluff bundle, it cushions softly, for it sheds tiny bits that cling to your errant nose. There is a faint plant scent, earthy and slightly sweet, carrying memories of summer marshes even in deep winter. Researchers still discuss how widespread plant minus fiber insulation was. Some think it was a supplementary measure, used mainly when furs were scarce. Others point to its presence in every climatic zone, suggesting it wasn't an afterthought, but a key layer in the survival toolkit. Because grasses decay quickly, archaeologists rarely get to examine them, and a lack of long-lasting remains makes certainty difficult. But the consistency of oral records indicates their role was more important than outsiders once believed. Preparation itself was the rhythm of daily life. Families gathered reeds and grasses in late summer, carefully drying them for winter use. Cattle were stripped and shaken for fluff, their seeds floating like snow as they were processed. Bark could be pounded until fibrous, woven into mats that served as beds. Children often helped with these tasks, their small hands deft enough to tuck fibers into gaps. The work was tedious, but without it, nights would have been unbearable. Here is a delightful quirk: cattle fluff wasn't just insulation. It served as tinder too. A spark could ignite its fibers instantly, making fire miners starting easier in damp conditions. So the same material lining your bed could also ignite the flame that warmed your camp. Imagine lying in bed at night, knowing the softness under your head could also save you from a fireless dawn. The soundscape of a fiber miner's filled shelter is subtle. Every movement of your body produces a gentle rustling, like wind through dry grass. In the night's quiet, those faint whispers intertwine with the crackle of firewood and steady breathing of companions. It is a lullaby made of the simplest materials, yet as effective at ushering sleep as any grand arrangement of furs or robes. Psychological comfort mattered too. Surrounded by plant fibers, sleepers felt the memory of warmer seasons. The smell of reeds and bark carried hints of lakes and forests, reminding people the land was not only harsh, it was generous, cyclical, enduring. In dreams, perhaps you drift back to summer fields, the buzz of insects, heat shimmering on water. Even in winter, plants sang to you, promising return. And the eumes of vegetation went beyond bedding. Reed mats formed shelter walls. Cattle stuffed gaps to seal drafts. Bark strips were woven into screens that reflected heat back to sleepers. Every part of a plant could be adapted for warmth if you knew how to see its hidden potential. Survival here wasn't about brute force. It was about creativity, foresight, and trust in small things. Of course, challenges came. Fibers held moisture, losing effectiveness if not kept dry. Bedding had to be refreshed often, replaced with new pads or dried near the fire. Insects sometimes hid in stored bundles, making unwelcome appearances in winter. Yet even these drawbacks couldn't outweigh the benefits. A little dampness or a few pests beat the piercing cold of sleeping on bare ground. The modern echo of this ingenuity is everywhere down to jackets. Wool insulation, synthetic fibers all operate on the same principle: trap air, prevent heat loss. Even the fluff in your pillow owes its ancestry to the cattle's reeds and stripped bark of long ago. Technology may have refined it, but the wisdom remains indigenous at its roots. You close your eyes, imagining yourself curled on a reed bed, head pillowed on cattle fluff, wrapped in furs. Firelight touches the mat walls, shadows playing on the fibers. The air smells faintly sweet, a swamp memory locked in your shelter. You feel a gentleness in the night, as if nature has wrapped you not just in warmth but in kindness. As you drift, you know the next lesson awaits. Because before sleep, there were rituals of heat and purification. Sweat lodges, those steam miners filled sanctuaries, weren't just spiritual. They also doubled as preparation for winter nights. Stepping from their warmth into cold was paradoxical, yet it carried a secret power. That will be the story you encounter next. The night seems endless, stars frozen in place, the cold gnawing at your bones. No matter how thick the furs or how tightly you are curled against another sleeper, nothing helps. But then you recall something different. Not built of fur bark or cattle fluff. A ritual space filled with heat and steam, where people gathered before sleep. The sweat lodge. To outsiders it might have looked like ceremony, only a spiritual rite of purification. Yet for many indigenous peoples it was also practical, a way to charge the body with heat, carrying you through the frigid night. Records clearly show that sweat lodges used across North America were small-domed structures made of willow or saplings bent into arches, covered with hide mats or earth. Inside, glowing miners' hot stones were piled in a pit. Water poured over them produced dense steam. Imagine stepping into that space after a day of biting cold. Heat surges to envelop you. Your skin tingles, sweat springs instantly. For a time the outside world vanishes. Use it in warmth so intense, it seems impossible frost waits, just beyond the wall. Here is a detail that adds charm. Many people sang inside these lodges. Songs echoed off the low ceiling, mingling with the hiss of steam and the pop of stones. Laughter rose with the chants, the air thick with moisture. It wasn't just a ritual of endurance. It was joyful, communal, even playful at times. Children joined in, giggling as steam blurred their vision, marveling that a hut smaller than a teepee could feel like the heart of summer. The sensory world overwhelms you. The sharp smell of steam fills your nose, carrying the earthy scent of willow poles and hides. Heat presses on your skin, tightening it, loosening your muscles. Beads of sweat trickle down your back, soaking into the mat beneath you. In that moment you are not shivering, you are glowing, your body so profoundly remembering warmth that cold seems impossible to return. Researchers still debate the balance between practical and spiritual roles. Some argue Witu lodges were primarily sacred, their heat secondary. Others point to oral traditions describing them as preparation for winter sleep, entering warm, then stepping into the cold, the body radiating heat like an ember. Ceremony and survival intertwined. To separate them is to miss the point, because for those who lived it, life and spirit weren't ever apart. Imagine the transition. You leave the steamy lodge. Skin sleek, hair damp, breath billowing like smoke. Outside, the air slaps you. The cold is so sharp it almost burns. Yet you don't shiver, instead you feel calm. Your core still glows with the heat you stored inside. Prickly wrapping in a robe, you lie down by the fire, hides pulled over you, as sleep comes faster than it would have without that ritual, as if you've smuggled a piece of the lodge into your bloodstream. Some accounts note a strange practice after sweating. People sometimes rolled briefly in the snow. To modern ears, it sounds absurd, but the shock sealed pores, dried sweat, and invigorated the body. Children laughed. Adults bellowed in surprise, and everyone quickly bundled into warmth. What sounded like punishment became a gain, reminding people cold itself was not the enemy, but part of a larger balance. The sweat lodge also brought scents into the night. Herbs like sage, cedar, sweet grass often burned inside. When you later curl under bedding, you smell those aromas still clinging to your skin, mingling with fur and fire. Sleep drifts in on memory of steam. The cold is weakened by a reservoir of heat deep in your body. And it wasn't just about warmth. The sweat lodge strengthened lungs, cleansed skin, soothed muscles after hunting or gathering wood. A purified body rested better. Its tensions dissolved. So as you drift into sleep, your mind is calm, your body heavy with pleasant exhaustion. You realize warmth wasn't just borrowed from fire or fur. It was cultivated within you, stoked like a second fire beneath your skin. Modern echoes remain Scandinavian saunas, Turkish steam baths, hot springs worldwide. Each reflects the same truth. Humans everywhere seek heat, not just for survival but for spirit. In each case, when you step outside, the glow lingers, carrying you through cold air with surprising ease. Indigenous sweat lodges weren't oddities. They were part of a global language of warmth, expressed with local genius. Here was a strange thought to carry into your drowsiness. Some oral traditions described ancestors, spirits also sitting in the sweat lodge, joining the singing, their unseen presence swelling the chorus. You imagine closing your eyes, sweat dripping from your face, feeling an unseen hand pat your shoulder. Comfort, community, connection, real or imagined, deepen the feeling of being sheltered. And so, as you stretch out after leaving the sweat lodge, furs pulled tight, your skin still humming with heat, you feel a rare peace. The night is still winter, the air still deadly, but you are fortified from within. Before your eyes fully close, you sense the next lesson waiting. Tools of bone and antler, carved to shape shelters, making survival possible when wood or stone alone weren't enough. The ingenuity of shaping nature with nature itself. That is what you will discover next. Wake in the cool silence after the sweat lodge. Your body still glows with residual heat. You notice quiet bustle around the camp. The avalanches resting there shaping. Bone and antler tools chime softly as they carve, scrape, drill in hands. Survival here wasn't just about finding shelter. It was about making the tools that allowed shelter to exist. Without steel, without iron nails or axes, indigenous peoples turned to the most immediate resource, the bones of animals they hunted, and the antlers shed by deer, elk, or moose. Archaeological evidence confirms that bone, antler wedges, and sharpened shoulder-blades were among the earliest, most reliable building tools. Imagine someone using a rib-bone edge to a point to strip bark, or driving an antler wedge into frozen soil to loosen earth for a pit-house shelter. These weren't crude improvisations. They were finely made, their craftsmanship rivaling any blacksmith's precision. Here is a fascinating aside: some antler tools were intentionally left partly rough. The texture provided better grip, especially in cold weather where smooth surfaces could slip in chilled hands. You can picture a hunter grinning at the thought that a polished tool might look pretty, but could cost him fingers when frostbite struck. Practicality won over appearance every time. The tactile experience is clear in your imagination. You have the heavy moose antler in your hand, its surface ribbed and warm despite the chill. The weight feels balanced, the tip honed by repeated scraping. As you press it against frozen soil, you feel the shock of impact travel up your arm. Dirt and ice slowly fracture, give way. Each impact echoes in survival, another inch of soil loosened, another step closer to shelter. Researchers still debate to what extent bone and antler tools replaced stone ones. Some think stone knives remained primary, bone used only as backup. Others point to where patterns suggesting bone tools were everyday necessities, easier to raise open, lighter to carry, more versatile. The truth, as usual, was likely a blend. Different environments favored different tools. Still, it is certain that bone and antler weren't ever wasted. When an animal gave its body, its skeleton also became part of the cycle of survival. The soundscape of tool miners making sinzu, as in drift a scrape of sinew cord drawn across bone, the steady thump of an antler wedge, hammering a wood pole into frozen ground, the delicate crackle of bark being peeled. It is the quiet music of preparation, the rhythm that ensured nights were spent in warmth, not shivering under stars. There is also an interesting, almost playful side to these tools. Children carved miniature replicas, learning the craft by mimicking elders. Some of these toys have survived at archaeological sites: tiny chisels and scrapers, too delicate for serious use but perfect for teaching. Imagine a child proudly displaying a curved bone needle, grinning as an elder nods approval. Even plague carried the weight of necessity, because one day that child's skill would keep the family alive. Spiritual meaning lingered too. In some traditions, antlers symbolized strength, renewal, and connection to the animal world. Using an antler tool wasn't just practical. It was also a way of honoring the animal that had provided food and tools. Each strike of a wedge or slice of a scraper carried gratitude, a silent acknowledgement survival was shared between human and animal. Modern examples abound. Think of today's plastic or aluminum tools. Lightweight, durable, in some cases replacing heavier steel. The principle's the same: use what works, not what tradition dictates. Bone and antler were the ultralight gear of their time, refined by testing across countless generations. The feel of these tools against your skin stays with you as you settle to rest again. The antler's ridges press into your palm. The scent of freshly scraped bone lingers, sharp and slightly sweet in the air. You imagine hunters returning from a day's labor, hands rough but proud, tools ready for tomorrow's shelter minus building or firewood cutting. The cold might be relentless, but ingenuity was equally so. Then there is a quirky image you can't shake: an elder honing a rib blade by the fire, humming softly, while a child pretends to cut the air with their toy version. Around them the camp quiets. The fire steadies, the scent of hides and smoke fills the air. In that moment, the line between tool, toy, ritual, and survival blurs. Everything served life, and life served everything. As your eyes close, you feel the weight of bone and antler tools resting nearby, silent guardians of the night. You realize survival came not just from the warmth of objects, but from the warmth of relationships, even with animals. That truth grows clearer in the next lesson, where you discover how dogs themselves became companions not just in hunting, but in the deepest cold of night. The embers glowst eddies your breath, but this night feels colder than most. The furs are heavy, the bark walls sturdy, yet frost still seeps in. You turn over, pulling your robe tighter, when suddenly I feel a different warmth, alive, rhythmic, breathing beside you. A dog curls against your hip, its body emitting steady heat, fur thick and musky. You realize you are not enduring this night alone. Historical records clearly show that long before horses arrived on the plains, dogs were constant companions in many Native American communities. They pulled loads on travois, guarded camps, and crucially, shared warmth on frigid nights. Early explorers often remarked that families treated dogs as both workers and bedfellows, drying them close in winter to ward off frost. This bond wasn't just affection. It was intensely practical. Here is a twist you might find interesting. Some reports describe children piling on dogs like living pillows. Imagine a circle of siblings sleeping in a heap, arms draped over a large animal like a husky, the dog tolerating it with stoic patience. Children stayed warm. The dog got the comfort of the pack. Even today, you can imagine that furry warmth against your icy toes. The tactile experience springs to your mind instantly. Your hand sinks into thick fur, coarse on top but soft beneath. A faint scent of smoke and earth rises as warmth does. The dog shifts slightly, sighs, its body vibrating with a low snore. The feeling's different from fur or a heated stone. This warmth breathes, moves, responds to your touch. It is both companionship and insulation. Researchers still debate how common this practice was. Some evidence suggests dogs mainly slept with children, providing warmth and protection. Others think adults relied on them too, especially hunters away from camp. Truth likely varied by region, but what's clear is this: no creature was wasted. Dogs hunted, hauled, barked alarms, then lay down as blankets when needed. And dogs weren't just passive providers of warmth. They chose positions strategically. Clever animals curled by the fire, then pressed against your side, acting as living warmth conduits. In groups, dogs crowded among people, their combined heat raising the temperature of the entire shelter. You imagine drifting into sleep to the low sound of multiple dogs' steady breathing, their presence turning a fragile shelter into something closer to home. There's a strange footnote to early fur traders complained that camps reeked of dog smell, describing it as overpowering. Yet what they considered stench was merely the smell of life preserved. To indigenous families, the scent of dog meant warmth, alertness, loyalty. It was the smell of life, preserved through winter. The night soundscape is unique. Besides the crackle of fire and human snores, dogs whimper in dreams, paws twitching as if chasing unseen things. Occasionally, when wolves howl outside the circle, a low growl rumbles, reminding you these animals weren't just heaters, they were guards. Falling asleep with a dog pressed against you, you knew danger outside would not go unnoticed. Spiritually, dogs carried deeper meaning. In some traditions, there were guides to the afterlife, guardians between worlds. Sleeping with a dog wasn't just comfort, it was soul protection. Their warmth wasn't merely physical. It was assurance that, even in dreams, you weren't alone. The modern example is obvious. Share their beds. Not out of need, but affection. Yet even now, pet owners wake on winter mornings with feet warmed by a loyal animal curled at the bed's end. That primal exchange, heat for companionship, remains unchanged. Emotional comfort stays with you as you imagine lying in that crowded shelter. Children giggling softly before sleep, snuggling a dog. Elders smiling faintly at the chorus of dog snores and barks. Hunters resting easier, knowing their companion would alert them if trouble neared. Wolf wasn't just thermal, it was emotional, collective, sewn into the rhythm of camp life. Of course, not every night was peaceful. Dogs sometimes fought over space, or barked suddenly at shadows, disturbing sleep. Fleas and less traveled between fur and human. Yet even these inconveniences were tolerated, Because without dogs, nights would have been crueler, colder, lonelier. Survival rarely meant perfection. It meant partnership. You reach out now in your mind, stroking the dog curled beside you. Its fur is thick with winter. Its ears twitch as it dreams. You feel your own breath sync with its rhythm. Strange comfort, slowing your heart, relaxing your muscles. Swaddled in hides, pressed against family and animal, you realize how deeply interwoven life was here. Humans didn't conquer winter alone. They survived by interweaving their lives with the animals that walked beside them. As you drift into sleep with that loyal warmth beside you, another image surfaces. Beyond the circle of sleepers, the cold night wasn't entirely still. There were others awake, pacing slowly under moonlight, eyes scanning the woods, ensuring no spark died, no predator approached. The quiet duty of the moonlit patrol. That is the next direction your journey will take. The dog stirs at your hip, ears twitching, then gives a low growl before fading back into silence. You open your eyes, and beyond the firelight, you glimpse a figure moving slowly under the moon. It isn't a wolf or wandering spirit. It is one of your own, deliberately pacing, a vigilant guard ensuring the camp does not sink too comfortably into slumber. Not everyone slept the whole night through. Some rose silently, patrolled the perimeter, tended the flame, listened for the smallest change in the woods. These were the moonlit patrols, the quiet work that kept families alive. Historical descriptions tell us clearly that in many indigenous camps, someone always kept watch. It wasn't just about feeding the fire. It was about vigilance. Wolves prowled the edges. Bears sometimes stirred from hibernation. Enemies could approach in silence. To fall completely into sleep was to invite disaster, so patrols were woven into the rhythm of winter nights, say slump circling, constant listening, guaranteeing the camp was never fully vulnerable. Here is a detail that feels both practical and poetic. Keepers often timed their patrols by the moon. The glow of a waxing or waning orb determined how far they could see, where shadows fell, how long a circuit took. The sky was the schedule. Imagine stepping into the crisp night, snow crunching under your moccasins, looking up to judge your time not by numbers but by the silver disk streaking the sky. The sensory experience is vivid. Once you leave the shared warmth of furs, you feel the cold bite harder. Your breath plumes white, freezing at your hood's edge. The ground underfoot quakes sharply with each step, the sound carrying far in the silence. From inside the camp, you hear the muffled snores of sleepers, the soft crackle of fire, the occasional whimper of a dog in dreams. But on the periphery, it is just you and winter's vastness. Scholars still argue over how structured these patrols were. Some evidence points to formal rotations, each adult responsible for a set time at night. Other accounts describe a more flexible system, with lighter sleepers naturally waking, taking a turn, returning to rest when fatigue hit. Perhaps it varied by season, danger, or tribe. But the constant was this: always someone bore the burden of wakefulness so others could rest. You can almost hear the keeper's thoughts as he walks. He notes sparks drifting up from the fire, making sure no ember flies into bark walls. He listens for wolf howls. Are they near or far tonight? He stops to study stars, checking their alignment, noting shifts that might predict weather changes. Then he returns to the fire, kneels, stirs the embers, gently lays a log across, watches it hiss and catch. His hands smell of smoke now. His cheeks sting with cold, but he feels a quiet satisfaction. The camp is safe. Sometimes the keeper would speak to himself, to the fire, or to spirits he felt lingering nearby. One missionary recorded hearing a man murmur prayers at night, thanking the moon for its light, asking trees to guard the children, promising to feed the fire faithfully. To him, patrol wasn't a chore. It was a sacred duty, a conversation with the living world. You imagine your own breath forming words in the cold air, a soft prayer carried into the glittering stars. A quirky glimpse might make you smile. Young men sometimes used patrol as a chance to boast bravery. They'd walk farther than necessary, daring to approach the tree line to prove they weren't afraid. Elders shook their heads at such recklessness, but the impulse was timeless, the young testing themselves against fear. Perhaps later someone stumbled back, cheeks flushed, insisting he'd chased off a shadow. True or not, the story added warmth to morning laughter. The texture of patrol is unique. Your moccasins press into snow, leaving crisp prints that will vanish in the next snowfall, faintly with forming frost. Your hands ache as you hold a stick ready to shift timbers or shoe an animal. Every scent sharpens. The faint hoot of an owl, the rustle of a branch, the twinkle of ice crystals reflecting firelight. Drowsiness tugs at you, but vigilance pushes back. Modern examples aren't hard to find. Soldiers still rotate guard duty, parents stay awake while infants sleep, security guards patrol empty buildings at night. The practice is the same: one awake so many may rest. But in the wilderness, the stakes were absolute. A single lapse could mean frozen bodies, looted stores, or worse. Patrol was to shoulder life itself. The psychological weight mattered as much as the cold. Imagine knowing that while others lay peacefully, you were the thin wall between them and death. It sharpened your mind, deepened your sense of belonging. You patrolled not just for yourself, but for the entire circle: children, elders, hunters, dogs, fire. Each step was responsibility embodied. Yet there were odd moments to the quiet, the moonlight, the rhythm of breath and pace. Those things even brought the keeper into a kind of trance. Many later recalled moments of all the northern lights shimmering overhead, wolves harmonizing on a distant hill, snow falling in utter silence, making the world feel sacred. Patrol was to witness the night's beauty, something sleepers never could. As dawn nears, the keeper kneels again by the fire, coaxes the flame higher, greets the waking day. He slips back under his robe, body chilled but spirit satisfied, knowing he did his duty. Tomorrow there will be another, and another after that, as long as the camp stands. As you drift into your own drowsy state, regaining warmth from frozen fire, you realize the next lesson waits, this time not a shelter of bark or snow, but the portable teepee, the ingenious house that balanced warmth and mobility, letting entire nations follow the buffalo without freezing at night. The patrolling figure recedes into shadows, dawn tinting the horizon pale blue. Use it up, rub sleep from your eyes, and notice the shapes of dwellings scattered across the snowy plain. Tall, graceful structures rise like inverted cones, their hides stretched taut, poles pointing skyward as if in conversation with heaven. These are tip-is, and they are not just homes. They are architecture's secret to portable warmth, the very embodiment of a structure that let entire nations move freely yet never freeze. Historical records leave little doubt the teepee was among the most effective shelters designed for cold climates. A frame of long poles, often 12 to 20, tied at the top and spread into a circle, created a stable skeleton. Over this, heavy buffalo hides were draped, sewn, and pinned, forming a weatherproof skin. Inside, a central fire pit glowed, smoke drawn up through an adjustable vent at the top. Imagine stepping into one. At first your body shivers in the icy air, then immediately relaxes as warmth envelops you. The glow of flames flickers on the curved hide walls. You might be interested to know that teepees breathed. Unlike rigid houses, they adapted naturally to weather. In summer, vents could be rolled up for airflow. In winter, they were drawn tight, sometimes even doubled with extra hides for added insulation. Sloping walls deflected wind, and the circular design ensured no draft lingered long. It was a house in perfect sync with nature's rhythms, flexible where modern walls are stubborn. The tactile world inside is rich. Reach out and you feel the buffalo hide's soft, slightly greasy texture. Its surface is faintly smoky from months of fire. Press your palm to a pole, and it is smooth from use, each one marked by years of assembly undecipherably. Beneath you, a layer of reeds of firm that softens the frozen ground, gives under you its resilience. The air smells of smoke, fur, and roasting meat, a combination both pungent and comforting. Scholars still discuss the teepee's exact origins. Some think its design spread outward from the northern plains, while others propose multiple regions independently created similar forms. The debate highlights how ingenious yet practical the form was: light enough to travel, sturdy enough for blizzards. Whatever its roots, by the 18th century the teepee was iconic, a symbol of both mobility and endurance. Now picture a scene on a long winter night: a central fire crackles, small enough not to overload, but steady enough to warm the circular space. Children sit nearest, basking in the glow, while adults rest at the edges. Smoke drifts lazily, rising toward the top. You lie back against a robe, listening to sparks pop and low voices murmur. Outside, smoke falls silently, piling at the base, sealing the teepee tighter. Inside, it feels like another world: cozy, collective, safe. Here is an interesting detail that might surprise you. Families often marked their tip is with personal symbols painted on the hide. Dreams, visions, or great hunts. Others used star or animal patterns. So, while every teepee shared the same basic shape, no two were exactly alike. Imagine sleeping under painted images of buffalo or constellations, the flicker of firelight making them seem to move on the wands. It wasn't just shelter. It was story, identity, memory. The process of raising one was a ritual of efficiency, traditionally supervised by women who could erect a full teepee in under an hour. Poles were leaned, tied, spread, and covered with a rhythm honed since childhood. Lunch does not reflect smaller heights. Watching the process was to see a family build a house not with nails and boards but with skill and memory. Modern designers still marvel at the teepee's aerodynamic resilience. Its conical shape dispersed wind rather than resisting it, while the poles slant allowed smoke to escape without letting in too much cold air. You might spend thousands today on high-stacked ends and ventilation systems, yet none balance portability and comfort as elegantly as this century's modest-old invention. The soundscape inside soothes you: the hiss of snow melting on the outer skin, the rhythmic creak of poles shifting as wind presses them. The crackle of flame is the heart of it all, filling the space with warmth. Around you voices murmur softly, fading as sleepers curl under hides. An infant whimpers briefly, soothed by a mother's hum. Outside, wind may howl, but the interior world is mild. Emotionally, the teepee gave more than warmth. It gave dignity. A family could carry its home across the plains, rebuild wherever the buffalo roamed, never feel homeless. Sleeping inside was to know stability in motion, comfort in uncertainty. The walls themselves reminded you that survival didn't mean staying still. It meant taking your world with you. There is a spiritual clue to some tribes saw the teepee's poles as the ribs of a great being, its walls the sheltering skin of earth itself. Sleeping inside was to rest within creation, protected by forces larger than yourself. You close your eyes, imagining lying in that living circle, your dreams framed by sacred geometry, your breath rising with the smoke toward stars. One flawless. In fierce storms, vents flapped, draught seeped in, fires sometimes sparked dangerously close to bedding. Families had to stay alert, constantly adjusting, learning intuitively how to balance air, flame, and hide. But imperfection didn't mean failure. It meant adaptation, the willingness to listen to the house itself and respond. As dawn approaches, the fire ends, but the teepee still holds its warmth. You wake not stiffened, frozen, but restored, ready to move camp again if needed. When you step outside, you see another kind of shelter waiting in milder climates: reed huts and woven mats, breathable yet protected. Survival always bent to place and season. Yet another proof. You walk out of the teepee, the air fresh, sparkling with frost, but soon you wander in imagination to more southerly places. The biting wind softens, smell thins to patches, rivers no longer freeze in silence. In these gentler locales, warmth didn't come from buffalo hides or snow caves. Instead, it came from reeds, rushes, and woven mats. The kind of shelter that breathed with the air yet still protected sleepers from chill. Archaeological remains are sparse but telling, indicating that in wetlands and coastal plains, many indigenous groups built treed huts or at 9 covered dwellings. The principle was simple: gather kettles, reeds, or tall plants, dry them, and weave them into broad mats. These mats could be laid over a pole frame, much like bark or hides in colder regions. They shed wind and drain while allowing air circulation, perfect for climates where winter was cool but not brutal. You might be surprised to learn that these mats served not only as walls. Families spread them under bedding, stacked them as insulation, or rolled them as pillows. A single reed mat might serve as floor, wall roof, and blanket as needed. They were as versatile as the cattle fluff you imagined earlier, but sturdier, easier to carry, and reusable for years. Imagine the tactile feel of lying on such a mat. Your hand brushes the surface, smooth one way, prickly the other, with faint ridges where reeds were bound. Beneath you, the mat gives a soft creak as it shifts with the ground. Above, more mats hang as walls. Gaps are small enough to block wind, but wide enough to let smoke curl through. You inhale, and the air smells faintly of hay, the sun minus warmed, earthy scent of grass, even in deep winter. Historians still debate whether reed huts were purely seasonal or used year minus round. Some evidence suggests tribes along the California coast and in the southeast lived in such shelters year after year, replacing mats as they wore out. Others think they were more transitional, built quickly for seasonal hunting or fishing trips. The debate remains unsettled, but their importance is clear. Without mats, nights on riverbanks or lakeshores would have been harsh indeed. Here is a quirky glimpse of daily life. Children's sometimes played by tightly rolling themselves in reed mats, pretending to be cocoons or animals. Early European observers wrote with bemusement about these reed burritos, as if children had invented a game from insulation material. Yet that play carried a subtle lesson to by handling mats from a young age. Children learned how to weave, repair, and respect the materials that would one day keep their families warm. The soundscape inside a reed hut is different from a teepee or snow cave. When wind blows, mats rustle softly, almost like summer leaves. Rain patters gently, absorbed by layers before dripping to earth. The fire crackles at the center, smoke drifting up through small openings around you. The night feels less claustrophobic, more airy, yet still protective. The hut breathes, and you breathe with it. Preparing these mats was labor minus intensive. Women harvested reeds in late summer, cutting them near the base, bundling them, leaving them to dry. Later, they wove them into large panels using cordage made from bark or fibers. Each mat had to be sturdy enough to bend, yet flexible enough to roll. Stored carefully, they could be packed onto travaux or boats, carried to the next site, then unrolled and lashed into place. Within hours, a whole house took shape. Modern campers might recognize the ingenuity here. Woven mats are essentially the ancestors of today's portable roll minus up sleeping pads and tarps. Lightweight, versatile, easy to pitch and pack. The less is more principle echoes across centuries. Emotionally, reed huts carried a different comfort than buffalo minus hide tip is or snow shelters. They whispered of rivers, marshes, open sky, the scent of oat harvest time, the buzz of insects, the warmth of a sunny day. Sleeping inside was to remember seasons of plenty, even as frost coated the ground. The hut itself became a capsule of memory, wrapping sleepers in warmth and nostalgia. There is a spiritual dimension here too in some traditions. Reeds symbolized flexibility and resilience. They bent without breaking, thrived in both water and air. They grew no matter how many times they were cut. Living within reed walls was to embody those same qualities: adaptability, endurance, renewal. You close your eyes imagining drifting into sleep in such a hut. Your dreams are shaped by the whisper of reeds, reminding you to bend, not break. Of course, reed huts had their flaws. They couldn't withstand blizzards like snow caves or teepees. In floods, mats could rot or warp, requiring constant repair. But in regions where extremes were rare, they offered the perfect balance of shelter and breathability. When the cold was more merciful, you didn't need a fortress. The night's sounds continue in your imagination. The faint croak of frogs from a nearby swamp, the hoot of an owl overhead, the rustle of mats shifting in the wind. Inside, a family huddles together. The fire's glow bounces off woven walls. soothed by a grandmother's hand. The hut carries them, simple but enough, carrying them into dawn. As you rest here, swathed in freshened reeds, you feel another lesson shimmering on the horizon. Survival wasn't just about static shelters. It extended to where food was gathered. Think of hunters and fishermen camping on frozen lakes, building fires along the shore. Even in the pursuit of food, warmth had to be engineered. That story waits for you, lit by firelight reflected off ice. The reed hut fades from memory. Its whispering walls you leave behind as you travel again in imagination northward. The air grows sharper. Your breath grows whiter. Before you is a frozen lake, solid as stone, gleaming under moonlight. Here warmth isn't just about sleep. It's about enduring hours spent in open cold, fishing, hunting, waiting. Imagine yourself crouched by a hole chopped through ice, fingers stiff, stomach growling, and knowing that without fire, the night could be brutal. One certainty that emerges from historical records is that indigenous fishermen and hunters brought fire even onto the ice. Fire miners side camps dotted lake shores, smoke curling up, men and women ending lines and nets under the frozen surface. Flames weren't just for cooking the catch. They created pockets of warmth, places where frostbite loosened its grip, bodies could rest. Imagine several small fires glowing across the lake. Their light reflects on ice, like lanterns in a winter cathedral. Here was a strange, memorable detail in some regions. People built raised wood platforms or placed flat stones under fires to prevent ice from melting. Building a fire directly on frozen water would slowly sink it. So ingenuity demanded a barrier layer of bark, soil, even reed mats. Anything that let flames burn without sinking into the depths below. The thought makes you smile. Humans, vulnerable before the tiled, tricked the ice itself to carry fire. The sensory world is intense. The crackle of fire mixes with the groan of shifting ice. You feel the sting of wind on your cheeks, sharp as a blade. But the front of your body warms as flames lick outward, glowing red. Your hands ache with stiffness, thawing as you hold them toward the flame. Steam rises from damp mittens. Around you, the night is vast, an endless white plain, stars glittering above. It feels intimate, almost cozy. Archaeologists still discuss the permanence of such lakeside camps. Some think families lived nearby in semi-minor structured huts through the winter, venturing onto the ice daily. Others consider these fires temporary, kindled only during expeditions. The evidence is murky charred stones found on ancient shorelines, blackened soil where fires once burned. Clear as the principal fire followed food, and food often lived under ice. Imagine the rhythm of such a night. Hunters chisel holes with bone or stone tools, drop lines baited with saved scraps. Others set nets under ice, carefully marking locations. Meanwhile, the fire never rests. Always someone feeds it, not just for warmth but for immediate cooking of the catch. Imagine the smell of fresh fish sizzling on a stick. Enter flames. The scent mingles with smoke and frost. Hunger quiets. Bellies fill. Warmth spreads from inside out. You sleep later more deeply, satisfied in body and spirit. They quirky glints from oral stories. Sometimes children roasted fish skin scraps as snacks, crisping them until they curled. These little treats doubled as entertainment. The crunch echoed in the frozen silence. Even in hardship, small joys soften the edge of cold. The scene's texture roots, you further the ice underfoot hard, slick, slightly greasy. A fire crackles on its platform. The bark or soil beneath steams where heat meets frozen water. Your robe smells of fish oil. Your hands are greasy from handling lines. Yet, you don't mind. The smell of food means survival. You edge closer to the fire, shoulder to shoulder with others, letting warmth seep in. Spiritual meaning accompanied these lakeside fires too. Water was sacred, home to powerful beings. Cutting ice and drawing life from beneath was an act done with awe. The fire above, water below, to elements balancing, protecting and feeding the people. Stories told around those lakeside fires often reflected that harmony, the fish's gift, the flame as guardian, the human as mediator between forces. Modern examples are easy to find. Ice fishermen still erect shelters on frozen lakes, hauling propane heaters or stoves to chase off frost. Yet the principle is unchanged: fire on ice, warmth in the void, survival built on the union of danger and ingenuity. Every modern fishing shanty echoes the first flickering flames on ancient lakes. Psychological comfort mattered as much as the practical. Sitting by flame on endless ice, you feel less exposed. The fire turns the void into a room, gives emptiness a boundary. The laughter of companions, the taste of hot food, the smell of smoke, all of it stitches together comfort. You might still shiver, but you are no longer desperate. Risks remained, of course. Fire to hot could melt the platform, sending embers into water. Cracks sometimes echoed across the lake, making hearts race. But fear never fully conquered the ritual. The fire was rebuilt, nets reset, the meal prepared again. But it could not command. Now, as you finish your imagined meal and cool by the dying fire's embers, you realize warmth was also shaped by change. For when trade brought wool blankets, beads, and metal tools, survival itself transformed, and winter nights weren't ever quite the same again. That story of adaptation, of trading for warmth, is what you will explore next. The fire on ice crackles, dying down, and you rub your hands, letting warmth fade into memory. But as you turn toward camp, you notice something different spread over the sleeping family. Not just furs, not just reed or bark mats, but all blankets with bright, colorful patterns. They look strange at first, out of place in the wilderness. Yet they have their own story. These are trade goods, and once they entered indigenous camps, they forever altered how people spent winter nights. A detail historians unanimously agree on: wool blankets arrived early in the 17th century with European contact, brought by traders and spreading rapidly through networks across the continent. By the 18th and 19th centuries, they were ubiquitous, often exchanged for furs, food, or labor. You can picture a trader unfurling a pile of blankets in a village square, heavy, vividly colored, with bold stripes. To families accustomed to thick hides smelling of smoke and musk, these new blankets must have felt like small miracles. Here is an interesting detail worth imagining: some of the most prized wool blankets were patterned in meaningful ways. The Hudson's Bay Company's famous point blankets, each marked with small black lines indicating size. To Europeans, these weren't measurement units. To indigenous families, they became symbols of trade and status. Owning such a blanket wasn't just about warmth. It was about connection to a rapidly changing new world. The sensory contrast is striking. A wool blanket feels different from buffalo hide: lighter, softer, less greasy. When you pull it over your shoulders, it scratches faintly, fibers catching on your skin. It smells at first of carbolic soap, not smoke, and its bright dyes shine even in dim firelight. Compared to the earthy musk of furs, wool seemed almost luxurious. Yet beneath that comfort lay a complex story. Scholars still debate the balance between adoption and resistance. Some argue wool quickly replaced hides as preferred bedding, prized for portability on these. Others insist hides remained dominant, blankets supplementing but not replacing them. The archaeological record, cloth fragments, trade logs, oral accounts offers evidence for both directions. What's clear is that blankets changed the rhythm of survival, easing some labor while weaving communities deeper into a trade economy. Imagine a winter night in a plains teepee after wool blankets arrived. Families still lie on buffalo robes, still wrap children in furs, but now the top layer might be a wool cover, its colors flashing orange in the firelight. The blanket traps he'd already collected by hides and bodies, creating an extra layer of comfort. For a mother tucking in a child, that combination must have felt like multiplied security, the old ways strengthened by new cloth. Here is a quirky observation from early logs: some people cut wool blankets into strips, sewing them into clothing or decorating robes. Cloth wasn't just bedding. It was raw material creatively repurposed. A blanket might serve as a coat by day, a cover by night, a gift in ceremony. Its versatility made it more than an item. It became part of cultural expression. The soundscape of wool is subtle. Unlike furs that creak or mats that rustle, wool muffles. When you move under it, the noise is a slight scratch, barely heard. The night interrupted less by sound. Fire crackles, dogs snore, but the blanket itself holds silence, wrapping you in quiet. Yet danger was woven into those bright threads too. Blankets carried disease, most notoriously smallpox, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes by tragic design. The thought is chilling warmth intertwined with sickness. The item that promised life also delivered death. Memories of those epidemics linger in oral histories. A reminder that survival was never just about ingenuity or adaptability. It was also about vulnerability to forces beyond control. Despite the dark shadow, blankets endured as cherished items. They became heirlooms passed down generations, valued not just for warmth but for beauty. To be wrapped in one was to feel the comfort of the present and the weight of family memory. Even today, Pendleton blankets, descendants of those first wool trades, are gifted at births, weddings, ceremonies. After all, warmth was never just physical. It was symbolic, collective, lasting. Think of your own life. Perhaps you've pulled a blanket over yourself on a cold night. One that smelled of your grandmother, or one bought on a journey that reminds you of a place. Warmth. It is memory. In that light, the story of wool blankets is alien. It is human, universal. You sink deeper into the imagined fabric. Now the scratch of wool against your skin, firelight making its colors brighter than they are. You feel lighter than when swaddled in furs, yet just as safe. The blend of old and new makes you wonder how else indigenous peoples healed their bodies and spirits against winter's bite. But thought leads you forward, toward herbs, salves, and heated packs soothed onto frost-snipped limbs before sleep. The medicine of warmth, that is your next lesson. The wool blanket still clings to your shoulders. Its rough softness is a strange comfort. But warmth isn't always enough. The wilderness could gnaw at your body in ways furned fire couldn't heal numbed fingers, aching joints, skin raw from frostbite. That's when knowledge shifted from shelter to medicine. Herbs, salves, and heated packs became the quiet healers. Tucked into bedding at night to soothe pain and bring sleep back to weary limbs. We know from oral tradition and ethnobotanical studies that indigenous peoples across the continent cultivated a rich pharmacy of warming remedies. Cedar and pine needles were steeped into teas that spread heat through the chest, easing breathing on cold nights. Spruce resin was rubbed on skin to prevent windburn, its sticky layer sealing in warmth. And salves made from bear grease or bone marrow, sometimes heated over fire and wrapped in bark or cloth, were applied to stiff muscles before sleep. Imagine lying under furs, the faint scent of resin and smoke filling your nose, the ache in your fingers slowly easing. Here is a strange twist. Some tribes used heateds, and as a kind of treatment pack. Sand was collected, warmed in the fire, then poured into a deerskin pouch and placed on frostbitten toes or a cold belly. The warmth radiated evenly, lasting longer than a hot stone. Imagine cradling such a bag under your robe at night. Its steady glow soothed, not just the body but the mind. The sensations are vivid. Your skin tingles where salve is applied. The scent of herbs clings to your breath. The soft weight of a heated pack rests heavily against your side. The cold outside feels distant now, pushed back by remedies that turned nature's raw edge into gentle medicine. You shift lightly under the bedding, hit a faint crackle of resin drying on your skin. Feel yourself sliding into deeper rest. Researchers still debate how much of this knowledge was purely practical versus ceremonial. Some argue herb choices were based on chemical effectiveness: cedar's antibacterial oils, pine's vitamin C, spruce resin's protective layer. Others emphasize spiritual significance, noting healing rituals often included songs, prayers, or smudging. The truth, of course, was a weaving of science and spirit. A salve might physically soothe frostbite, but the accompanying chant soothed the soul. Long before the word holistic existed, healing was holistic. Imagine a winter night in camp. A child returns from play, hands red and swollen from snow. A grandmother kneels by the fire, heats a small bundle of herbs, then wraps it gently around the fingers. She murmurs words of comfort, blows softly to cool the rat, then presses it close. The child's whimper subsides into the robe. The scent of cedar clings like perfume. Soon sleep claims them, pine forgotten. That small ritual kept countless generations alive through cold seasons. Here is an interesting record that might make you smile. Some remedies doubled as food flavoring. Tea brewed to warm the chest might also be served with dried meat, layering the line between medicine and meal. You can imagine someone sipping on, chuckling softly, joking that the doctor tasted like dinner tonight. Survival was never compartmentalized. Everything served multiple purposes. The soundscape of medicine is gentler than that of shelters or fire. It is the bubbling of water in a pot, the soft grinding of roots, the hiss of steam as a salve is lifted from embers. Over this, voices murmur, comfort, tell stories to distract from pain. In such an environment, healing felt as emotional as it was physical. The textures stay with you, the sticky feel of resin on fingertips, the roughness of bark against skin where a poultice is tied, the fur covering everything, locking warmth inside. You close your eyes, feeling the glow radiate outward, not fierce like fire, but steady calm, enough to keep the fear of frost at bay. Modern medicine echoes these tricks in surprising ways. Heating pads, steam rubs, herbal teas, all are descendants of practices indigenous peoples perfected long ago. Lot we buy in pharmacies today once grew wild in forests, gathered by hands that knew which can soothe, which resin healed, which herb drove cold from wounds. Emotionally, these remedies mattered as comfort. Falling asleep with a heated pack on your chest, you felt not only warmer but cared for. Someone had gathered the herbs, prepared the salt, stayed awake by the fire to heat it for you. That intimacy wove warmth directly into relationships. Healing wasn't anonymous. It was personal, collective, loving. But challenges lurked too. Some herbs could burn if used carelessly. Some salves cooled too quickly, leaving dampness that invited chill. Trial and error shaped the knowledge, each winter with its own risks. Yet across centuries, communities slowly perfected these remedies, weaving them into the nightly routines that made survival possible. As you inhale the scent of cedar, letting heat sink deeper into your bones, you understand the wisdom. Survival wasn't just about walls and fire. It was about tending the body as carefully as you tended flame. An untended fire went out. An untended body faltered. Both needed feeding, stoking, gentle vigilance. Tomorrow you will see that even children played their part, not just being healed but creating warmth themselves. Games in snow, dances by fire, rituals of laughter that kept blood flowing and spirits high. Because in winter, warmth came from joy too. The scent of cedar lingers in your nose. The warmth of salve still glows faintly on your skin, and then laughter ripples through the camp. Children tumble in snow, chase each other in wide circles, their breath rising in white bursts. At first you think they are merely playing, but then you realize this too is survival. Movement, laughter, games weren't just amusement in the wilderness. They were warmth in disguise. Accounts by early observers describe children rolling in snow, dashing between tip ears or leaping over frozen streams and collapsing in a pile of giggles. Adults smiled at the chaos, not just because it lifted moods, but because it kept small bodies warm. A child in constant motion was less likely to shiver, less likely to grow stiff and sick in the cold. What looked like play was actually a survival mechanism, cautiously tolerated. Here is a detail that gives you pause even on the coldest nights. Some children were told to run short distances before bed. The idea was simple: get their blood pumping. Get their cheeks flushed so that when they curled into furs, their bodies carried heat into the shed bedding. Imagine a mother urging her son to run to the nearest tree and back. His legs pound. Breath comes fast, that he's quickly tucked between siblings so warmth radiates from his still glowing skin. Again became insulation. The sensory world is lively, the squeak of snow under bare feet or soft moccasins, the shrieks as children dodge each other, the barking of dogs joining the chase. The fire flickers brighter as running bodies stir the air. When play ends, children collapse into piles of furs, their laughter dissolving into yawns. limbs twitching with leftover energy. After such exertion, sleep comes fast, their warmth spilling over into the room. Scholars still discuss whether these activities were deliberate strategies taught by elders or simply the natural exuberance of youth wisely channeled. Some accounts frame them as intentional routines, almost like exercise. Others think adults just let children's instinctive play do the work. Either way, the result was the same: movement prevented cold from stealing young bodies in the long night. And play wasn't limited to children. Adults joined into circle dances by the fire, endurance contests, snowball fights, or simple storytelling with gestures and laughter. Each activity stirred blood, loosened stiff muscles, made people warmer before lying down. Imagine yourself stepping into a circle dance on a bitterly cold night. Your body sways, stomps, breath plumes steam, laughter bursts from your lips. When the dance ends, your heart pounds hot in your chest, and you collapse onto your bedding, carrying warmth that lasts for hours. There is a quirky anecdote from fur traders who witnessed children sledding down frozen hills on flattened bark. They complained the noise disturbed their sleep, but later admitted the children rarely seemed cold, despite thin clothing. The answer was obvious: joy kept them warm. You can almost hear the shrieks echoing in frozen valleys, a melody of resilience disguised as mischief. The texture of play lingers in your imagination: the smooth barks laid under a child's small hands, the clumps of snow sticking to Lydding's hair damp with sweat despite the cold. Even the feel of a child's hand, chill at first, then growing warm as they grip yours during a game. Warmth didn't come from fire or fur, but from energy and closeness. Spiritual teaching sometimes wove this truth into stories. Some tales warned that laziness invited cold spirits, while laughter and movement drove those spirits away. To go to sleep without play was to invite frost. To go to bed with a smile was to invite dreams, not nightmares. These lessons wrapped survival in myth, ensuring children understood instinctively that joy itself was a form of protection. Modern echoes are easy to find. Parents today know that children who run and play outside fall asleep faster and warmer. Recommend exercise on cold days to improve circulation. Athletes train in winter not just for strength, but to avoid hypothermia. The principle is timeless: heat is made, not just borrowed. The emotional comfort was vital. Imagine ending a day of hardship with laughter ringing over the camp. Spirits lifted, worries eased, even hunger was briefly forgotten. The warmth here wasn't just physical. It was joy layered over struggle. Survival was woven with laughter. You close your eyes, feeling that truth settle within you. A camp full of laughter was a camp awake with life. Of course, not every game was safe. Sometimes children slipped on ice. Sometimes they sweated too much and grew chilled afterward. Elders remained watchful, stepping in to calm when play threatened health. Balance was always winter's law. Risk too much, and warmth turned to danger. As you lie back now, replaying in your mind the sound of children's laughter mixed with crackling fire, you realize survival wasn't built on furs and firewood alone. It was built on movement, energy, joy. And when play subsided into weariness, stories passed warmth even farther, for words themselves became blankets, tales told by the fire, wrapping listeners in comfort until sleep conquered them. That will be the last secret you'll uncover. Fire minus side stories that turned fear into dreams, warming the soul on the coldest nights. The echo of children's laughter fades, the camp grows quiet again. The fire burns low. Shadows stretch across frozen mats. And you hear a voice begin to rise from the circle. This time not the crackle of fire or bark of a dog, but a story woven low and slow, carrying warmth beyond heat. Words themselves become blankets here, wrapping sleepers in comfort as effectively as any robe. Historical accounts describe winter storytelling as central to indigenous life. When nights were long and food scarce, stories filled time with purpose. There were entertainment, yes, but also education, spiritual